Good morning. I'm Chris Fanta. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Asthma Grand Rounds and to welcome also our colleagues who are participating by video conference at Mass General and North Shore and Leahy Clinic. And today we have a very special Asthma Grand Rounds made special by our illustrious visiting speaker, Dr. Suzanne Herd. We're delighted to have you, and she's going to be introduced by a colleague and friend of many years, I would say co-mover and co-shaker on the international asthma scene, Dr. Al Sheffer.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. It's indeed a great pleasure and a distinct honor to welcome Dr. Suzanne Herd, our friend, to the Brigham. But I would be remiss in only introducing Dr. Herd, for her husband, Claude Lafont, is accompanying her. And as I learned in their GINA operation, Claude is part of the program. And as you'll hear further in my introduction, it is quite appropriate for him to be very involved. Now, Dr. Herd's going to talk to us about GINA, the Global Initiative for Asthma, all her trials and their trials and tribulations in the developing of this outstanding international asthma education and therapy program. Dr. Herd graduated from the University of Washington, where she got her doctorate in biochemistry, and then went to University of California at Berkeley for 1 year. I guess that's about the limit for anybody. She then joined the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and shortly after being there, she became the director of the lung division. In this position, Dr. Herd has advanced the appreciation of asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease immensely. As a consequence, she's become a member of the allergy and respiratory organizations and has received presidential commendation on at least 2 occasions for this work. When Dr. Claude Lafont was then the director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, it became apparent that something had to be done for asthma, and he developed the National Asthma Education Program, from which your guidelines, the guidelines for the diagnosis and treatment of asthma that you used here, was developed. And shortly after that publication, Claude very astutely noted, every country in the world is going to do the same thing. And for that reason, he initiated the National Asthma Education Program, the Global Initiative for Asthma, GINA. Now, Sue Herd was the medical director of the National Asthma Education Program and became the national medical director for the GINA program. She'll tell you a little more today, the next hour, about GINA, but I wanted you to know the background for not just Dr. Herd, but for the participation of Dr. Lafont as well. Sue, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. It is really a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank Dr. Sheffer for his very nice introduction. Today I have titled my presentation, Reducing the Burden of Asthma, a Global Approach. And I thought it was very nice to just remind us all it's 11/11/11 here in Boston today. The story is about 3 organizations, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the World Health Organization, and most important for our study today, the Global Initiative for Asthma. And I'll bring all 3 of these organizations into this presentation to show you how we've all worked closely together. So the program really began in 1971 when both Dr. Lafont and I were part of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute Division of Lung Diseases. One of the things that we do in the government, as you all are aware, is we're very eager to follow the vital statistics in this country. And we were very concerned in the lung division that the asthma prevalence was increasing in all age groups, as you can see from this slide, during the period, the decades of the 70s and 80s, especially prevalent asthma in age under 18. We were also concerned to look at the hospitalization data. This is very clear that hospitalization rates were going up for asthma during the decade of the 70s, again, of great concern to us. But probably what drew our attention, although the death rates for asthma were very low, nonetheless, they were particularly high in African American men and women. This brought our attention to the fact that we really needed to do something more about asthma. So in addition to what NIH does very well is provide support for all of the scientists who submit, or many of the scientists who submit regular research grants and center grants, the Division of Lung Diseases was the very first organization at NIH to put out a request for grant applications in 1975, where we were eager to study the pathogenesis of inflammation in the lung. This began to develop our knowledge about the role of inflammation in asthma. Then in 1980, we were very interested in developing specific information about self-management programs for asthma. And these contracts that we led in 1980 set the stage for many of the asthma self-management programs that are still in existence today. We were also very happy to see that the pharmaceutical companies were beginning to take an interest in developing medications that were eventually going to be used for asthma. But in 1985, there was a turn in our program. This was a very important event in our activities because we had a visitor who came to visit us in the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, somebody that you well know, Dr. Sheffer, and he said to us, "It is time to do something about asthma." And this was about 1985, and at that time, 1 year later, it led to the development of the National Asthma Education and Prevention Program, known famously as the NAEPP. Now, although this was coordinated by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, it's very important that this program brought together every single allergy, respiratory, private sector organization interested in asthma. And within 1 year, these organizations began talking to each other, learning from each other, and most important, developing information that would serve as a guideline for asthma care in this country. And that led to the first guidelines for the diagnosis and management of asthma here in the US that was led superbly by Dr. Sheffer. This report, which was called the National Asthma Education and Prevention Program Expert Panel Report, it really was a landmark document. It changed the perceptions about asthma and its treatment and emphasized the role of inflammation. Now, today that seems like years and years and years ago, but that was such an important concept and really first articulated in this document. This program was presented by Dr. Sheffer at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Advisory Council in February 1991 and endorsed by them as being the beginning of a very important era for chronic respiratory diseases. Well, at the same time, as Dr. Sheffer mentioned, we were also very interested to see that it wasn't only the US that was having this asthma increase in prevalence. As you can see from this slide, we had data from Finland, from Sweden, Japan, Scotland, UK, New Zealand, and Australia, all of which were very evident that asthma was a problem that was worldwide. And so the Division of Lung Diseases in 1990 convened a panel of experts from all of those countries that I just mentioned, and we developed what was called the International Consensus Report, 4 steps to achieve and maintain control of asthma. Well, it became clear as we presented this report, this included some of the panel members I thought was important to show. Dr. Sheffer was the chair of the program. Mrs. Taggart, who many of you might know, she's still working in the Division of Lung Diseases, was a driving force behind much of this work. Dr. Tim Clark from the UK, Dr. Jean Bousquet from France, and Dr. L'Enfant was the leader of the press conference which announced this international consensus document. Well, in 1993 then, 2 years later, we decided that it was time to join with the World Health Organization. As you well know, to reach the global community, you really need a global partner. So we worked with the World Health Organization and together came up with what we called the Global Initiative for Asthma, better known these days as GINA. But the Global Initiative for Asthma was really initiated through the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, but in close collaboration with the World Health Organization. Over the years, we've been very fortunate to have a series of people who have devoted an enormous amount of time to be leaders of this program. The first leader of the program was Dr. Scheffer. He was, after he retired from the program, Dr. Romaine Powles from Belgium, followed by Dr. Tim Clark, Dr. Paul O'Byrne, and currently Dr. Eric Bateman. So these are the people who have been the leaders of our executive and board of directors and have put an enormous amount of their own time and effort into helping with this campaign. We're very grateful to all of them and all of the other members of the committee. But when we set out the goals for GINA, you can see that this is on the slide. The most important thing is we had to have people realize that asthma was a global public health problem. We needed to develop some key recommendations so that we could understand the diagnosis and management of asthma, not just in individual settings, but as a research and clinical community. And we wanted to provide strategies for recommendations so that not only could we treat and diagnose asthma in healthcare settings such as this, but how you can do it out in the middle of very small communities throughout the world. And we wanted to identify areas for future investigation. We wanted to continue to realize that there was a lot of research that needed to be done. Well, of course, as you're beginning to see, the first thing that we do is develop a report, and we had, of course, a report for the GINA program as well. But what's important about this report is it came out in 1995, so that it was 3 years later than the NAEP report. So it built on what we already had developed. But we developed it with cooperation of the World Health Organization. Dr. Scheffer, when you have a chance to talk to him about some of the meetings in Geneva, he'll tell you that this was not an easy task. A lot of people were involved, a global panel from around the world, all of whom wanted to have their own say in all of that. And Dr. Scheffer, and followed by Dr. Powles, served as chair and got this report out in record time. It's really been a landmark document and has been translated and distributed really virtually around the world. Well, I'd like to just emphasize that in the year 2000, GINA decided to start out as its own organization. So we pretty much separated from the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and the World Health Organization. Even though we continued to partner with them, we wanted to make sure that we had our own recognition as an organization. So the year 2000 was another landmark for our group.